is kind of it's one of these pan-Arabic ideas. I mean, there were a lot of them. The other kind is Nasserism in Egypt, or with a stronger Islamic influence, was Gaddafi tried to do in Libya. But I mean, within Iraq and also in Syria, you had these very strong competing ideologies after the end of the Ottoman Empire. There was this kind of Iraqi nationalism that tried to include all the people of Iraq as Iraqi people. Then, of course, there was a very strong communist movement. There were the Islamists. And then you had this Arab Socialist Party that tried to become the spearhead of Arab unity of all Arabs, mixing it with some sort of socialist ideas that were anti-communist and more similar to like these Prussian socialism in Germany, or these socialist elements without the within the fascist movement, like in Italy, and trying to create first a homogeneous Arab state in Iraq, which was a very violent and cruel act, because Iraq wasn't an Arab country. I mean, Arabs were even a minority in Iraq, or Sunni Arabs. So the idea was, we need to Arabize our country first. We need first to kind of create this homogeneous Arab nation here in Iraq. And that had a lot of consequences. The first consequence, for example, was forcing Arab names on Christians, Turkmens, even Kurds. The second, the kind of being very suspicious towards the Shia minority of Iraq, because there is one very strong element within Pan-Arabic movement, and that is being anti-Persian and anti-Shia, especially in Iraq, because it had this idea that the real Arabs, I mean, the real genuine Arabs of Iraq are Sunnis. So Shias very, very fast became like being suspicious of being spies of Iran or second-class citizens. So that from the first day, it was not, and in that point, it's very similar to a lot of fascist movement. It was not, we don't accept the population we have here. This population is kind of dirty or muddy. So we have to create something new. And this something new is kind of the real Arab state. And that Arab state will be kind of the avant-garde of the Arab reawakening in the whole region of the Middle East and later North Africa. Panarabism is not a real secular movement. I mean, it is very strongly based on the idea that the Quran is an Arab book and that the Arab are the real Muslims. And later, after Islam spread to Persia, to Turkey, to other countries, kind of it changed. One has to go back to the real roots. And that point is very, very similar to Islamist movements. I mean, both are looking back. Both are looking back to the great old times. The ones to the Arab Caliphate and the others to the Ummah. So that they have very much also in common with these kind of fascist movements. Also, I mean, their attitude and their hatred against Israel, against Zionism, their anti-imperialism or worldism, or however you want to call it, is very, very similar. The language of these both movements is very hate-filled, and both are since they always fail because it's an illusion what they want to do, they create enemies and always define themselves through the fight against the enemies. And the enemies are basically the same. So for decades in the Middle East, or especially in countries like Iraq and Syria, you had this very crazy situation that you had two almost totalitarian ideologies, one in power and one in so-called opposition, but they were just claiming that the other doesn't really mean it. Like the most absurd conflict has been like the Islamists say they want to destroy Israel and we are the real enemies. So they also have a common enemy or common foe, and this common foe is liberalism, tolerance.